Hello and welcome to the last Common Good Breakfast Series event of 2016. On behalf of the entire Neuger Communications Group and Engaged Print team, we are thrilled that you all are here. I'm Leah Rich, a Vice President and Senior Communications Counselor at Neuger Communications Group. For those of you who are new to the Common Good Breakfast Series, I want to tell you a little bit about Neuger Communications Group. We are a full-service strategic communications firm with offices in Northfield and Minneapolis. We're in the business of helping organizations of all sizes tell their story. So what does that mean? Think brochures, websites, logos, media relations, strategic communications plans. Those are all pieces that fit in our wheelhouse. Neuger Communications Group is also the proud owner of a Heidelberg 6-color press and an HP Indigo digital press. This allows us to design and print some pretty fantastic pieces. Our colleagues at Engage Print do a wonderful job, and we'd love to have the chance to partner with you on your next print job. Before we hear from our speakers, I'd like to thank today's sponsors, Engage Print, Flight Creative Media, First National Bank of Northfield, and Northfield Retirement Community. With their support, we're able to give generously to today's featured nonprofit, Hired. And now, a bit about Hired. Hired's work in the Twin Cities is truly unparalleled, providing job skills training and employment assistance to low-income adults, recent immigrants, and youth. Under the leadership of Executive Director Jane Samardzija, Hired collaborates with employers to meet their future workforce needs, and we are proud to donate proceeds from today's event to Hired. And now, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Joanne Henry. Joanne provides senior counsel to clients across the nation. She is a seasoned communicator in situations of crisis and has a nose for good media stories like none other. Joanne will introduce our panelists and moderate today's Talent Gap discussion. Welcome, Joanne.
Thanks, Leah. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin this session to talk about the talent gap, I'd like to ask you a few questions in the audience so we know what perspectives you're bringing this morning and maybe a little bit more about what you'd like to hear about. So, first of all, I'd like to know how many of you are employers out there or in a hiring role that are trying to hire right now in this current environment. So a lot of employers. How many work in a company where there are currently some unfilled jobs? Wow, that's a lot. I think those were bigger hands. So I think we're seeing the reason for the talent gap participation this morning. How many of you are seeking employment? Maybe we can do some matching today. Just a thought. All right, well, find each other. And then there are some, if there are talent gaps in education, we have a lot of terrific educators today here from both secondary education and higher education, and some of them on this panel. Now, the last question I have is to the employers, the CEOs, the people who are inside your company responsible for driving growth. How many of you believe that the ability or the inability to find the right talent is one of your top 3 concerns right now? Okay, so a handful there. So many of you feel it's maybe not in the top 3, or maybe you're thinking it's definitely a concern, but we think we can do it if we get the right strategies. And all these topics, I think, will be in part of our discussion this morning, but I hope that all of you will bring your great questions and maybe some great answers as well when we get to that piece, which is about 20 to the hour. So with that, I'd like to invite our panelists to come up, and I'll introduce them. Okay. So, I'm sorry, I didn't have my coffee here, and I'll be moving on.
Are we missing one?
I know, are we missing something?
No, it's actually Joe.
All right. So I'll start on the left with, and thank you all for coming. First of all, let's give a round of applause to our panelists for showing up this morning and sharing with us. We really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your insights and your experiences. Dr. Richard Wagner on the far left is president of Dunwoody University, a highly regarded technical college founded in 1914. Today, Dunwoody is the only nonprofit technical school in the upper Midwest, offering Bachelor of Science, associate degrees. I've learned a recent engineering degree, a four-year engineering degree, and many, many certificate programs in key technical areas of need for Minnesota and well beyond. Before being tapped as president of Dunwoody, Dr. Wagner was briefly at Hennepin Technical College, but had many, many positions before that of leadership at Dunwoody, helping the college usher in its very first bachelor's degree program while significantly expanding the scope of their programs. And I'll let him talk a little bit more about what's happening at Dunwoody. And then next, Whitney Giga from Medtronic is a talent management consultant for the Cardiac and Vascular Group within Medtronic, the global leader in medical technology focused on the management of chronic conditions. Medtronic has more than 85,000 employees and counting, and Whitney is responsible for rolling out the core global talent management processes and a thought leader in building and managing the talent bench for her business group. And then finally, Tim O'Neill is a regional analyst for the 7-county Twin Cities region of Minnesota for the Department of Employment and Economic Development, DEED. And Tim's work and expertise focuses on the economy and the job market, industry trends, workforce availability, and hiring demand. So we'll look for him for all the good stats and strategies as well. DEED works to create an economic environment to produce jobs and improve the quality of the state's workforce, providing direct services to customers throughout the state. So if I've made any mistakes on your bios, I apologize. You can correct them as we go. All right, thanks. We'll get right to it. One more from me, and then you'll get to listen to the others. So the talent gap. What do you think are the biggest causes for a talent gap right now, and how would you define what's happening in the Minnesota economy with the talent gap that we have? So any one of you could start on that. Tim, you want to start on that?
Is this working? Can everybody hear me? All right, I suppose I'll start out with some statistics for you guys. You know, at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's always great to hear labor market information.
Yeah.
I actually do 3-hour presentations. I've got one tomorrow. So if you're interested at all in statistics and data tools, let me know after this conference here, and I'll be happy to help out with getting you signed up for that. It's exciting stuff. But looking at the talent gap, one of the things, you know, with our data tools, you can really focus in on some of the statistics and some of the trends that we're seeing in our labor market. Our office collects everything from employment numbers to unemployment. Vacancies, of course, is one of the biggest tools that you can look to, our job vacancy survey. So you can see where the hiring demand is, the characteristics of that hiring demand. Is it part-time, full-time work? What types of education does it require? What types of training does it require? You can look at graduate employment outcomes. So our programs right now, our educational programs aligning well with the demand of the labor market. I can't at all talk about all of this data this morning within a half an hour. So I encourage you guys to contact our office and check out those tools online. Kind of a plug for the office there. But when we're looking at the talent gap, the two biggest things that come to mind are unemployment rate, of course. We're at a really low unemployment rate, 4%. That represents about 120,000 unemployed Minnesotans. That sounds like a lot of people. But it's been as high as 250,000 unemployed people. So we've more than halved the number of unemployed. So the unemployment pool in Minnesota is it's really small. So there's a small number of people for employers, a lot of you out there to draw from for your workforce needs. And then the question going forward then is, what is the education, what is the training, what is the expertise of these unemployed persons that you can draw from this very small pool of unemployed persons? Add to that the number of vacancies in Minnesota right now from our job vacancy survey, record highs, about 100,000 job vacancies in Minnesota. So the question now is, how do we best align the unemployed persons with the demand of the market? So that's just looking at the raw numbers, the overall big picture, that's where the talent gap starts to emerge.
Thanks. And Whitney, I know that you certainly hire within Minnesota, but across the country and across the globe. So could you maybe give us some perspective that you have from hiring, not just in Minnesota, but where you're looking to fill the talent gaps in your organization?
Yeah, thank you. So what I would say is, so Medtronic is in 160 countries globally, so we're big. But in Minnesota, we have about almost 10,000 employees, primarily based in the metro area. In the last 2 years, we doubled in size when we acquired one of our competitors, Covidian. So we've had a lot of rapid growth in the last couple of years. The reality for us, though, that we're facing in regarding the talent gap is that we have new business strategies, like a lot of organizations. I don't think that's unique to med device, med tech. And so, for example, for us, we grew up as a medical device manufacturer, implanter, designer, et cetera, so things that go inside the body. And over the last few years, we have actually been becoming more of a technology company in terms of app-based technology that support our devices, things like that, that makes it more affordable, more reasonable for us. So take, for example, healthcare reform in the United States. With all the pressure to reduce healthcare costs, there's also a lot of pressure on us to reduce the cost of our products. But then also, we're becoming a solutions company. So take, for example, like, we have traditionally made things. We've made products, et cetera. So to switch in terms of our employee base, the knowledge base, we're looking at people from healthcare. We're looking for, and healthcare in terms of people that have worked in hospitals and things like that, as well as people that have worked in like insurance. So a new thing for us is to potentially market ourselves to employees outside in the labor market, that we are an employer of choice for them, because it's still relatively new and perceived as somewhat of a risk to come work in a big giant company that this isn't the same type of strategy they've always had. Will we stick with it? Things like that. So those are a couple examples for us. So that's something we're looking for around the globe. But I don't think that's unique to our industry. I spend a decent amount of time doing these types of things and networking, and I think a lot of companies are looking for new and different ways to do business. And so I think that's part of the problem is the labor force. Over the last 10 years, we've traditionally hired people that are experienced in those areas because we've been able to. The economy has allowed for that, and we're now back in this more competitive landscape. And the reality is, I think that a lot of companies, Medtronic included, are going to have to start growing their talent. We're going to take more risks on people and start investing in them like we used to do back in the olden days, and teaching and growing the talent. Was that specific enough?
Yeah,
Okay.
great. Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to Rich representing the educational perspective.
Sure. So I'll just, from a micro kind of perspective on what we hear about in what's missing in the workforce right now, or what's causing some of the skills gap challenges. One is, I think from 2007 to about 2013, 14, the number of students in high schools has gone down, right? So there's fewer students graduating from high schools than we had maybe a decade ago. And that's now kind of at the bottom of the trough. Will come up slowly, I believe, through like 18. I'm looking at statistics, guy, right? Make sure, come back up slowly, right, between now and 2020. But not and it's not going to be rapid enough to really help continue to meet the demand. We do now have baby boomers retiring, so that phenomenon has happened. I think the Great Recession of 08, 09, 10, 11 kind of pushed some of those retirement decisions off, but they're leaving in troves right now. And what we hear from our industry partners all the time is that they just can't find enough skilled people, right? So last year, Dunwoody placed 99.5% of its students, its graduates, in the field for which they were trained, with an average starting salary of $40,000. And you think we really are happy about that, which we are, but for every one of those graduates we placed in a company, there are at least 15 to 20 positions that were unfilled. Right, so when I talk to manufacturers, when I talk to auto dealers who's on the service side can't find technicians, I mean, there is a tremendous shortage of skilled labor in our workforce right now. And the companies that are creative in their approaches to growing their own talent, retaining their talent, developing relationships with schools, those are the ones that are going to be able to thrive in the economy. I mean, 4% unemployment, you can't find people at 4% unemployment, and that's probably not going to change in the short period here. So I would say for the rest of this decade, your most scarce resource is going to be your talent. And what we do is we've developed a lot of partnerships to work with companies. We've developed a lot of partnerships to work with different industries. We're doing all kinds of things which we can talk about later, but you know, just talking about the skills gap, and while I don't, you know, we don't see a lot of the macro statistics, I can only tell you what company CEOs tell me. You know, there was one company up in Anoka, manufacturing firm, brand new production line, ready to ramp up and improve output and grow revenue. Not enough technicians to assemble it. Sitting on the loading dock waiting. Wanted to hire all of our graduates from a given program, robotics and automation. So those are challenges are real when you talk to the employers. And this skills piece is where we really need to align our student and our workforce needs so that we can transition people into the workforce quicker and at great wages. So.
Can I build off that? So I just want to make sure that it comes across that this is not a Minnesota-specific issue.
Right.
This is something that is around the world, and also in the United States. We do have the boomers retiring. A couple of years ago, we looked at our statistics. In my last role, I was an analyst, a data analyst for us on the talent side, but then also helped us with our strategic workforce planning process. So how will we forecast our talent needs over the next few years, and what will we do about it based on our strategy? So I spent a lot of time looking at the labor market statistics and specific to our industry. And so, for example, our industry is growing at a 10 to 12% growth rate in the United States, but the overall industry, not our industry, the overall all industries combined has a contraction forecast, and you could probably correct me with more specifics, but something like a forecast of 8% negative growth. So to the point of the boomers are finally starting to retire, that is true. But I want to make sure that it comes across as this is not a Minnesota-specific thing. We have our own unique challenges of getting people from sunnier, warmer places to try their first winter here and then fall in love. But I do think, Minnesota is actually a decently quickly growing labor market compared to other places. And then we also have other attractions that can get people here in terms of the quality of life and things like that. It is also obviously cheaper than trying to live in San Francisco. So just want to make sure that came across, because I do think some of these shortages are really real, but they are not unique to Minnesota.
Yeah, just one quick tag on to that too is I serve on the Governor's Workforce Development Council, and about 2 years ago we went through a strategic planning session that was led by a facilitator from New Jersey, and at the start of it that was his tee up. If we're thinking about a state solution to the skills gap and economic growth, we got to stop that. This is a national challenge. If we as a nation don't address this, our ability to be the leading economy, to be the leading hirer, to be the leading innovator, all those things are going to go away if we don't start thinking about this more from a regional or national perspective.
Thanks. Great insights. What is the mix right now of the job vacancies? Can anybody, it sounds like you've got a good handle on the mix from the employer standpoint, and Tim, we were talking a little bit, I think you've got a little more detail on what's the mix that, I've got 100,000 job vacancies in Minnesota. I think you had told me 54,000 job vacancies in the 7-county metro area, just to bring it back locally for a bit. What's the mix of those vacancies, and are we graduating people that have the skills to fill the kind of job vacancies we have?
Yeah, sure. Also, I have to say, I was a history major, so I have no idea how I got this job, and that's why I've got all these statistics up here to look at.
Because data analysts don't exist in droves, so people grow them.
Yep.
Okay. So much for graduating, retraining.
Yep. But when you're looking at the job vacancy survey and the results that we get, you can also look at Wanted Analytics, now Talent Neuron. That's kind of an up-to-date, similar tool. Yeah, it's pretty cool information to our job vacancy survey. And it makes sense when you start to look at what's most in demand. So when you're looking at the 100,000 vacancies, 1/5 of those are in healthcare and social assistance. It's by far the largest industry sector in Minnesota. It's been seeing the largest growth. It's added 100,000 jobs in Minnesota over the last 10 years. We project it to be the largest growing going forward. And again, a lot of that has to do with the baby boomer generation. So going forward, our office projects 130,000 net new openings. We project 700,000 replacement openings on top of that. And that's because of people retiring or otherwise leaving the occupation. So healthcare makes sense to see that taking up so many vacancies, and the requirements, the needs are varied and vast. I mean, you've got needs for phlebotomists, nursing assistants, home health aides, registered nursing. And when you go across these occupations, and then when you think about manufacturing, the need there, and construction, people ask me commonly, what jobs are most in demand? It's almost all jobs are in demand, except for maybe mining. And so when you're looking at our job vacancy survey, when you're telling people to look at this information and some of the resources we have, it makes sense when you start to look at these numbers. Another thing that's kind of controversial, I suppose, especially with post-secondary institutions.
They seem cool. Go for it.
Yeah. A majority of the vacancies that we have currently, and the majority of the vacancies that we project going forward, will not require post-secondary education. The largest 3 occupational groups in Minnesota are office and administrative support, sales and related, food prep and serving. They cover over 900,000 occupations, 1/3 of our total labor market, and there's constant turnover in these occupations. So that's one reason why there is a high demand for these occupations, but they don't require post-secondary education. The silver lining, and I guess kind of also a point of, something to keep in mind, is the fastest growing occupations do require post-secondary education, and especially in the metro area. For instance, 90% of IT jobs are located here in the metro. These are jobs that do require post-secondary education. So the trick, again, when you're looking at the job vacancy results, healthcare at the top, you've got accommodation and food services and retail trade coming in second and third, manufacturing at fourth. The trick, again, is just aligning the demand with the available supply.
And I think that if I can just add, also the wage piece, right? Because we want people working in livable wage jobs that have livable wage careers, right? So I think that's a big part of what the conversation needs to be. If you're interested, there was a study done a few years ago by the Georgetown University's Center for Workforce Development, I think it is, and they did exactly what you're doing from the national level and talked about, there's a lot of like right now, the high school diploma used to be entry or access to the middle class. Really now you need something post-secondary. It doesn't need to be a 4-year degree. It doesn't even need to be a 2-year degree. It could be as simple as a A+ certificate to be working as a help desk technician in a big call center for a company to manage the IT infrastructure or something. But the need to continue on, because I think where the point of conflict is, and that's where probably the best conversation happens, is that we have this great big need for food service. What's the average salary, and is that going to sustain a family of 3 or 4, right? And then how can we help transition people from positions, because we need people in those positions, but can we use those for kind of a landing spot while we re-educate and get them ready to move on into the high-paying, high-demand occupations.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, when I speak to high schoolers, sometimes they're really tricky to talk to. You gotta be really cool to hold their attention. And I think reaching out to high schoolers, even middle schoolers, and especially their parents, to kind of get the dialogue going of, you don't necessarily need that 4-year liberal arts degree, but looking at what jobs are in demand in your own backyards. Sometimes I think getting that into their thoughts about what am I going to do, where's the demand, what are the wages like. I think talking about CTE, I think, is huge. So with manufacturing and construction and certain areas of healthcare, getting kids interested in those types of jobs. Manufacturing, kind of breaking down the stigmas that are associated with a lot of these jobs that do have really decent wages. And then for those that are interested in moving beyond into a career type setting with, I mentioned before, the 3 largest occupations don't require post-secondary education, but maybe telling them or getting them interested in these jobs that, you do these jobs like home health aides, great jobs, really low wages. It's almost criminal for how low these wages are for the things that they have to do. But yeah, getting them into those jobs so they get these skill sets, experience under their belts, and so when they do go for those careers later, they've got the resume that they need to get those careers. So at the same time, we're we're meeting the demand of all areas of the labor market, and it's in constant flux, but it's one way to skirt around. Our office tries to be a little bit more optimistic about workforce shortages, and so that's one way to better align, kind of skirt around these workforce shortage issues.
Relating to the pay gap, I don't know if any of you have some perspective on this piece, but when we get to the audience questions, I'd love to hear a little bit of talking about challenges and solutions for those industries that have regulated pay caps on their workforce. So for example, in home health care aides and other positions where there's regulated pay caps, what are those institutions going to do? How can they get around that, get people maybe to be entry level, for example, to move up? But what are some of those solutions, or industry or segments like the restaurant industry where the margins, preclude paying higher? They might be at minimum wage, but that's still not what they need to feed families. So I'd like to get into that more, but if any of you have, with the audience, if any of you have some thoughts on that, I'd like to hear that too.
Well, I think as it relates to pay, Medtronic's pretty competitive. We do have our own challenges, but I don't think they're the worst out there. So, one of the things that we have been tasked with is trying to stay competitive for these new emerging skill sets that we haven't really had good compa ratios. So our internal compensation rewards teams don't have really good statistics because they've always benchmarked against our particular industry, med device and pharmaceuticals. So for example, like the tech space, software engineering is an example. So when we're trying to recruit people from the Googles of the world, Apples, et cetera, like everybody else, we're trying to get them to Minnesota for one, but then in some cases it's to get them to LA as opposed to being in the Bay Area is a challenge. But so we've run into our own challenges as it relates to compensation. So as we're creating these new jobs, families, and skill sets, we're off drastically for some job families, and it's been really tough. Some things we've learned the hard way, where we've had our own big corporate bureaucratic challenges. So we have to get people to fit into our job family bands. And there have been instances where we've tried to hire a specific individual skill set, and we had to go all the way up to the CEO, which is a lot of layers, to get approval for an extra large stock grant and things like that, or extra large bonus. And also we have not funded relocation packages the way we should have traditionally. So they say, for those of you that do or don't have this type of statistical data for your organization, a family of 4, so you want to hire one person, about 10 years of experience, it's about $50,000 to $70,000 to get them to move, and that's including somewhere like from Wisconsin to Minnesota. It's pretty expensive in terms of what they have to cover out of pocket. So we have those types of challenges that we have had to face. We don't really, other than the pay bands that we have for each level, we have pretty good rigor and structure in terms of the different job families. Occasionally they'll create a new job family, but we do have to often work within our own boundaries.
Yeah.
I think also for executives, that'd be the other thing I would add is, if you're wanting someone with global experience or from certain industries or locations, it's crazy expensive what executives cost.
Mm-hmm. Rich, I'd love to hear more about, you've got all those jobs that aren't filled. It's terrific that you're nearly at 100% fill rate for your graduates, placement rates for your graduates. How can Dunwoody expand? What does your incoming student look like? What's the mix of your students? Where are they coming from? Who are they? Why do they choose Dunwoody? So big questions, but.
Yeah, so, I'll just talk in some general terms. We primarily serve the Twin Cities 7-county area, so we get most of our students right from Hennepin County and Ramsey County. Our average age is right around 25, so we have a lot of reverse kind of transfers, students who've gone maybe to a 4-year institution and found that it wasn't a good fit, or the program wasn't a good fit, so they come back. But we've been doing, when we looked at the landscape around 2012 and said, how are we going to continue to deliver on our mission and help meet the workforce needs of the Twin Cities and the greater, the whole state of Minnesota, what are the areas we could focus in? So we revamped a program called the Youth Career Awareness Program, where we actually go into high schools and work with high school seniors And we have a summer program between their junior and senior year in high school, and then between their senior year in high school and their first year at a college. And we're doing a lot of academic prep, we're doing a lot of role modeling, we're doing a lot of self-esteem development. We're helping the students prepare for college, and if they come to Dunwoody, we have a nice scholarship program for graduates of the Youth Career Awareness Program. There are caveats around attendance and grade point averages and parental involvement and all the things that make for a successful transition. We filled that program. We also look to bring more women into these fields because they're underrepresented in the construction and manufacturing and auto repair fields. So we created a Women in Technical Careers program where we work with agencies and high schools to bring in women with scholarships and support. And it's not just about getting in the front door. In all these programs, the direction the team has is, recruit, retain, graduate, place, and help manage their careers. So our Women in Technical Careers program is full. I think we have about 40 more women enrolled in that coming into our freshman class every year because of that program. We're also working with the Northside Funders Group to put a program together called North at Work to work with African American males on the North Side who right now are about 55% unemployed, with short-term, quick training programs to get people into the workforce at great wages with great career potential. And then there's a whole piece of mentorship that comes in to help support those students as they come in and into the workforce. And lastly, we looked around the Twin Cities and said, one of the things we ought to be doing is attracting talent into our state. And I think you talked about, we do have 3 big obstacles to recruiting people to come here, right? January, February, and March, right? Other than that, great place, right? So we looked at, what kind of programs will attract students and what's needed in the workforce and where are we underrepresented? So we launched a School of Engineering. 4-year standalone bachelor's degrees, mechanical engineering, software engineering, electrical engineering. And those programs were developed in partnership with industry to attract and retain talent in the Twin Cities and meet the demand of industry and serve a need for students, because students really only have a few options if they want to become engineers in Minnesota. And our student population, which is about 80% Pell Grant recipients, I don't think those families have the wherewithal to navigate a pretty complex higher education landscape to figure out if they don't get into the University of Minnesota, which had like 15,000 applicants into the School of Engineering for 1,000 positions. If you don't get in there, where can they go? So we launched that School of Engineering and a recruiter to go out state and out of state to try and recruit people into the Twin Cities. Because if we lose talent, if students graduate from high school and they go to Iowa State or Purdue or Penn State or wherever for their engineering degree, they go to companies that have partnerships with those schools. It's not necessarily going to be Medtronic, but I bet you're out there trying to recruit those students probably, right? So our philosophy was, let's offer some of those programs here, attract people here, and help instead of thinking about how much talent leaves or how much the skills gap is, how do we bring more skilled people into the state? So those are a few of the things we're working on to help address this challenge.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned the much higher unemployment rates in the North Side and among African Americans. That was one of my questions is, we look at that 4% rate among certain segments of the population, it's much bigger. So what can employers do? What are employers doing? Or educators doing to make sure that we are looking at the entire talent pool, so whether that's women in technical skills or diverse populations that haven't been typically looking at some of the higher paying jobs or being considered for them.
We specifically target those groups, so because we know we're not represented to match the labor market, but I would say that one of the challenges we have is we don't always take a good leap of faith on people and teach and train them. We have, it's a made-up Whitney term, but I call it the snob factor. We do it because we can. So we're a good employer, and we are fortunate enough that we typically have good applicants for most of our positions. So we typically then hire the most qualified candidate for the position, which doesn't always translate to some of those labor pool areas. But we do specifically target more representation for women for all of our job families, but in particular in management roles and higher, and also in engineering. But then also we're laser focused on the African American population for one, because that's very underrepresented in our industry. but also those other minority labor pools. So as far as what we do, we have some STEM programs where we do a lot on our foundation side to reinvest in early education, get young women and minorities when they're like 5th, 6th, 7th grade more actively involved in looking at science and engineering programs as being very cool and something that women in particular can excel in because it's not always like that in terms of their perception, a lot of pressure to be focused on female-related things. So, you know, there's that, but then also we have outreach programs for disabled individuals, for the more hourly, well, we have them for all, but where there's more targeted, depending upon if it's a physical disability for some of those other positions or a mental disability. But then also we specifically recruit and have internship programs for those spaces, but I think we could be doing more. The biggest thing for us is it comes down to the qualified applicants. So if we can get those labor pools just as qualified as everyone else, I think we'll see increased hiring rates from the employer perspective.
And then I'd add that, you know, to get there, we need to improve our high school graduation rates at certain areas. I mean, we got to make the investment and stop leaving generations of people behind. I mean, the reality is the solution to the skills gap in our state is right in front of us, right? Let's take a look at the generations that aren't graduating from high school. Let's figure out ways to get them to the starting line. High school education is no longer the finishing line. It's really the starting line, and we're just leaving too many students behind. And you can paint that picture, right? Those are the underserved, underrepresented populations that we talk about when we talk about skills gap, we talk that translates to an income gap and an achievement gap and all those things. And those are big nuts to crack, but there's certainly the solution. Part of the solution to the skills gap is get everybody across the starting line, which is getting your high school education so you can transition into career pathways.
Great. How about retraining? What's the importance of retraining if we've got this smaller labor pool and we really do need, you've got a sea change in terms of the kind of jobs. You brought people in as inventors, engineer product folks, and now it's about technology solutions, apps, the works, and healthcare delivery to consumers. What do you do to retrain the force that you already have, and how important is that?
Yeah, I'll take that, and then I'll also build on that, because one thing I didn't mention before, one of the biggest labor shortage areas that we currently have as well as forecasted is middle management to VPs. So just throwing that into the pool in terms of the shortage areas. So when I reference what we're training, it's also considering those pools as well. But I think the reality hit us a couple of years ago. We looked at our statistics, and I apologize if I said this before, I can't remember, but a couple of years ago we looked at our VP eligibility for retirement over the next 5 years. Not necessarily when they have retired, but we also looked at that too, but when their eligibility was, so by our pension standards, when could they start taking their pensions, and also looked at the economy starting to stabilize and improve, stock markets better, housing markets better, et cetera. And we had 50% of our VP population was eligible for retirement in the next 5 years, which was a little terrifying for Medtronic. So we fixed some of that, not all of that. And we've also more closely monitored our leadership succession and pipeline, which is why I'm in the role that I am now. We've added these types of positions. That's individuals that are specifically targeted on accelerated development for our high potential, high performing individuals. What are we doing? Is what we're investing in them, what we're doing, is it moving the needle? And we've primarily focused on the job experiences. So we've created some small, some big programs that improves on the job experiences, and employees can opt in to get additional experiences. So we've had ways that we've posted projects that people can volunteer for, increases their development experiences, as well as taking more chances on people. We're still not awesome at that. We typically like to hire those, especially in the management ranks, people that have proven it somewhere else, whether that's internally or externally. But we're getting better there. We've also taken our learning development organization, which every couple of years we've kind of changed our perspective on that, where we insource it or we outsource. And some of that's been senior leadership changes in their point of view. However, we have over the last few years made the purposeful choice to really oomph the ante, if you will. So that organization was like 5 employees. I think it's like 40 or 45 globally now. So we have teams of facilitators globally, as well as completely changed our learning development programs. We have a program coming this next year for individual contributors that show potential and interest in people management. So really to have an opportunity for them to test out those types of roles and learn about what it takes to be a good people manager. We have programs for brand new Medtronic managers, so 0 to 3 experience as a people manager, as well as the more seasoned senior managers. So they'd have to have more than 3 years of experience as a manager, but show potential for director programs or director level roles, and directors and senior directors readying them for VP programs. So not everyone can afford to have the type of global programs that we have, but there are lots of companies happy to try to help you with that. And the key takeaway I would suggest is that, look at what is available to you, who are the ones you want to invest in, that you want to grow. And one of the things that we have been hyper-focused on, whether it's those learning development programs or formal mentoring programs internally, which are low cost to free, but that we've also been focused on individuals that are learning agile. So we've also been, at all levels of the organization, more hyper-focused on hiring people that are smart and able to learn and interested in learning, right? So there's some individuals that just like their roles, they're steady eddies, and you still will need those types of people. But if you're looking for those individuals you can groom, that's the best type of hire to look for. So that's something that is a challenge for us because it's hard to teach that. So that becomes more of an innate thing.
Yeah, interesting. So develop the bench and look for agile individuals, agile learners.
Yeah.
So
And
interesting,
retained.
different way too.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
retained.
so we've looked at, and I didn't really comment on that because we haven't quite cracked this nut completely, but retention programs for individuals. So I take, boomers that might be thinking about or talking about retirement, right? So there's some of the legal side that you can't really ask them, are you planning to retire?
How old are you?
Yeah, right.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
But those that volunteer, some people want to retire, but they also believe and love their company, and so they want to look at knowledge transfer programs. How can we retain this knowledge in the organization, teach individuals that are earlier in their career? They don't have to be early in the career, but to keep that knowledge base. Look for alternate solutions. A lot of, I'd say all generations, but a lot of the boomers that are retiring want to come back as consultants because they don't want to work the crazy hours that most companies expect anymore. So they'd like to work 40 hours or less. So one of the ways they're doing it is moving towards this gig economy where people go off on their own and they're consultants. Or you could look at retention bonuses, sweet part-time jobs, things like that. There's other things that you could look at.
So many great ideas, and I know there's more from the other two panelists, but I want to throw it out to your questions and maybe some of your ideas as well. So first of all, again, thanks for all the good information so far, but we'd now love to hear from you, and sorry for having my back to some of you for the majority of this. I'll turn now, but just so I could talk with the panelists. And Rachel will be going over. If you want to raise your hand, we'll take questions from the floor.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. It was very informational. I have a question on the tail end of this. If history is any teacher, we can sometimes see some pitfalls on the other end of closing the talent gap of premature promotions or very high expectations on the part of the candidates. There's some benefits too. Maybe the organization then invests in continuing education and people do stay a little bit longer or something, but I can remember late 90s, we were giving pet insurance. We were doing anything to get somebody in the door. You talked about rigor. What would you recommend an organization do in foresight as they're closing this gap?
You mean in terms of retaining the individuals, like the proactive retention?
Making
or?
sure the organization doesn't go hog wild with
Yeah.
closing the gap and then realizing their senior leaders were way prematurely promoted and we're paying them all $1 million.
This is a more controversial answer. I don't know that we're going to have a choice. So I don't think it's going to be quite like the millennial, craziness, but I think we're going to start seeing bigger increases. The reality is companies have gotten away with 2 to 3% increases for a really long time. And a lot of their employees are annoyed with it now at this point. So that makes for a labor market where your employees are more highly disengaged than they've ever been. They've got a toe in the market. There's LinkedIn now. I mean, I think the recruiters are going to start making a lot more money than they have in the last 10 years. I think it's going to get a little nutty. So I think companies are going to have to start taking leaps of faith on people, and they're going to have to figure it out. I mean, I don't want to seem negative, but I think that's kind of the reality. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted because in some ways I would encourage you to go crazy because you're going to get the pool. You're going to get the good candidates that are attracted to that, and then your challenge becomes retaining and developing and making sure that they have the right mentors. I think that's also, there's going to be more pressure on the current management than there ever has been to actually spend the time. Like, they're going to have to create the time to teach, train, develop, handhold. And I don't think that's all necessarily, the millennials moving into people management or that kind of thing. But I do think there have been a lot of people that are younger Gen Xers that have been dying for people management roles, and there's been a lot of blockers. And so they haven't really had those experiences to be a people manager, but they probably exhibit a lot of those skills. So you have to kind of tease that out of the interview process of what have you done that you haven't necessarily gotten paid to do in terms of mentoring, teaching, coaching, really digging into their aspirations and really aligning on is this type of role actually aligned with what they really want to do. You can use assessments, you can do things like that to get a good indication of intellect as well as interest. So that those are maybe some options that people didn't use as much 15 years ago, 16 years ago. But I do think the reality is the labor market's going to warrant some of that.
Okay,
I don't think it's going to be crazy fast, but
Great question, especially some of the smaller organizations that really could, go the other way and have costs that they're not able to sustain. So, but great points of view. Over here and over there, Rachel, I don't see where you are, but there you are. Maybe tell us your name and if you are with an organization, the organization you represent. That would be great.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Yvonne LaRue. I'm working with the Children's Defense Fund in Minnesota.
Thanks.
My question is if you could speak to the role of immigrants in the labor market, and in particular, as you look at the talent gap, the role of skilled immigrants, the prototypical taxi driver who has an engineering degree from their home country.
Great question. Thank you.
Just looking at the statistics, it's really eye-opening to see just how much more diverse Minnesota is becoming. Within the last 14 years, between 2000 and 2014, the non-Hispanic white population in Minnesota grew by 2%. The population of color grew by 74%. So it's incredible how fast the state is becoming more diverse. You also look at flows of migrants. State-to-state flows, Minnesota actually has a deficit, but we more than make up for it with people coming in from abroad. So yes, looking forward, a key to the success of Minnesota going forward, a key to the success of businesses in Minnesota in all labor markets within the state is, looking at those immigrants that are coming into the state, looking at these non-traditional populations, these labor market resources, these pools that you can draw from. That's just looking at the statistics. That's what employers are going to need to do. Talking about the skill sets that these folks coming into Minnesota it's another conversation, but I've heard some stories about folks coming in, they've got these degrees, but then somehow they need to almost start over because they're not recognized right away within our economy and by businesses in our economy. So tackling that is key too.
I think that part of that challenge is, trying to validate what they're bringing in. Like some people will say they're engineers, and it's equivalent of really like an electrical maintenance position or an electrical maintenance degree. And we spend a lot of time circumventing the globe, right, from our office to try and figure out, well, where is that school? What does that degree represent? I think part of that, as I concur wholeheartedly, that another piece of the puzzle for us is to really make sure we have the talent we need in Minnesota, is to make sure we're reaching out to the immigrant populations, provide them pathways into our education system and into our employment systems. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is to that, but we have to get guidance from our accrediting agency, which is a regional accreditor that oversees, you know, like 3,000 schools, including University of Minnesota, et cetera. So it's something that we take on, though, because we want to help students, but that's part of the challenge. And then part of the other piece of that is really reaching out to the communities and building trust, so that they believe that your institution is going to help their youth migrate into the workforce. And those are the first generation Americans and recent immigrants are a big part of our population. We need to make sure we're educating to help close the skill gap.
Do you have numbers within the Dunwoody population of first generation college students?
We have about
Entering school?
55% of our students are first generation college students that come to Dunwoody. So it's a big number. Yeah, it's a big number. And you know, but you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Dunwoody, when they had the vision of creating this institution back in 1914, it was to create for all time a place for everybody to get access to this education. And that's what we do. We live true to our mission every day.
Thanks.
Just a quick comment, sorry.
You go first.
That I would add to that is just, we do visa sponsorships, but it's a bit of a challenge for us in terms of continuing those relationships, particularly for bachelor's degree individuals. So we have more luck with the U.S. Immigration Office if it's master's degree or PhD individuals. But I spent 11 years in recruiting, and 9 of which were at Medtronic, and we do have, you see the applications of people that were, you know, doctors in China or things like that are applying for higher level positions where they're not getting perceived the same as other candidate pools. And part of that has to do with not really understanding what they bring, and some of it is the degrees look different, the programs look different, so it's not equivalent as it would be for a U.S. degree. But we do have some where we hire directly from. English is often a challenge for us, written as well as in particular on the verbal side. But if individuals are successful with, you know, those other areas, they typically can flourish.
And I know we have other educational institutions here represented, some of which, and maybe all, focus on first-generation students and have different programs. So also, if anyone, besides questions, wants to comment on anything throughout the end of this discussion, feel free to raise your hand on that, too. Rachel, so question in the back?
Could I just
Right
mention
there.
quick, too? I think bringing up immigrants and that conversation brings up another part of the skills gap and a related term, hiring difficulties. So folks coming into Minnesota, what other barriers are they running into? Biggest ones that we've seen through our hiring difficulties surveys, through our job vacancy survey, are location and transportation. So you might have
Right.
all these openings, like in Washington County or in Scott County, some of the fastest growing areas within the metro area, but then folks, even within the metro, have difficulty getting out to these locations to fill these vacancies. So tackling transportation barriers, location barriers, housing barriers, that is also key to not only helping immigrants coming in, but everybody within the state of Minnesota.
There are things you can do with that, like carpools and things like that, like vans, and yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be like metro transit.
Exactly, yeah. So being creative, I think.
Pet insurance and car to go. So just a thought. Question?
So my name is Chuck Squires, and I work for Robert Half, but I also serve on the board at Hired. So thank you to the Neuger organization for their donation to Hired. So
Absolutely.
my question, I guess, is for Dr. Wagner, relates to that finishing high school. So it seems like where things are not getting better in terms of high school graduation rates and everything. So if you had a magic wand, what would you do differently now to get more people graduating from high school, which is a really big deal. I mean, it's a...
Well, there's a reason I'm in post-secondary education. For all my colleagues who are in the secondary system, I'll just give you my, what I believe could help. And I know the challenges of the classroom with high school students. Whether you're inner city or rural, they're tremendous. It's a battle, and I applaud all of you who are out there, because I think teaching is the most noble of professions. But I think one of the things that we as a state have done, which has been a mistake, is we've migrated away from funding career tech ed to the extent it needs to be funded in our high school system. And we've tried to help in Minneapolis with developing auto programs and construction programs, and even going as far as donating equipment to one of the high schools so they have a CNC machine so we can expose kids to that type of equipment. So I think that one of the things we've got to do, and I know, if we're thinking that there's going to be a lot of funding coming for education, it's probably not coming our way. But how do we figure out to make this pie, if it's not big, or the right ratio, so we can get kids interested in career pathways and see the value of education, so that they know when they get to high school, it's not just a matter of finishing high school because everybody says I have to. It really gives them direction. And I think part of what we need to do is put that career tech ed piece back into, middle schools and high schools. I mean, and if you're in education, it's coming back in some of our areas, and I know it's not the only solution. There's other pieces to it, but I've watched that change since the late '90s to at least recent attention in the last several years. But I just like to see more options and more exposure to the career paths for kids.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Another question here.
Hi, I had to jump in on that. My name is Ellen Waltauer. I lead a youth program called the Brand Lab, and we're focused on marketing and advertising. So we do just that. This is the marketing industry competitors that have come together to support our youth in high school. We go into high school classrooms and show them that creativity could lead to a viable career. And you can't ask for a job you don't know exists. Mm-hmm. Creative kids often flounder in high school, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, I can make a living. Yeah. So, no matter the industry, I think going back into the high school pipeline is really the best place to start.
And I know we probably ran out of time, but I'm going to just a quick, we got to get rid of that stigma too, that these are career pathways for kids that can't go to college, right? Mm-hmm. But you know how much computing power is in a car today? More computing power than took a spacecraft to the moon and brought the American back safely in 1969. In one module in a car, and there's 50 or more modules in your car. So you got to be, and by the way, now they drive by themselves, right? What kind of manufacturing do we do with Medtronic? I mean, this is not pens that we give away. This is implants that go into your body, right? I mean, these are sophisticated fields with really complex technology. Right? And you need critical thinking, you need analytical reasoning, you need the ability to be a lifelong learner because, soon Medtronics will be growing parts that will go into people's bodies, or 3D printing organs, and that technology is only 5 years away. And that's what these career tech ed jobs will be doing. So we got to make sure we're advocating that these are really, really worthwhile professions to pursue.
Great. We could take one last question, I think. So there's one there. It's possible you could catch these panelists on their way out as well. I know there's a lot more questions we can't get to all, but.
Will Rosenboom with Crescent, Minneapolis. I'm hearing from all of our clients this exact issue, and what I'm wondering is, and you hear about the millennials and what kind of drives them, and that's where the competition is for. Are there things besides just compensation that companies are doing to attract and compete for this talent? Because we hear about how the millennials like to work differently.
Mm-hmm. Can I take that one?
You sure can.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a lot of passion on
Yes,
this topic.
please.
That's why you're here.
It's
Yes,
way more
please.
than comp, people. It's way more than comp. So, mission, if you can get them hugely drawn to giving back, feeling like they're working for something that's philanthropic. So a clear mission, a clear vision, value statement, those types of things, they really rally around, and it also is an attractor as well as a retention tool for them. We've been fortunate that we've had an awesome mission for 60 years. However, that is something I've heard from engagement survey specialists that's like the number one motivator for retention for employees. But also millennials, even like the high potential, high performing ones, they tend to be a little higher maintenance employees. So they, in a lot of times, so look at the good and the bad with that, right? So you hear like they're very driven, they can outperform, they can be very efficient, things like that. But then the converse of that is they can be high maintenance. They want to get a lot of communication from their leadership, because think of the relationships they had with their parents. So a lot of times boomers and millennials actually are better partners than Xers and millennials are. They tend to, in particular, the Xers tend to get irritated by millennials because the Xers have been, especially those in-betweeners, so the younger Xers are the ones that are the most frustrated because they've had to like cut their teeth and fight to get up the ladder, and they've been told by, you know, the earlier parts of their career, just keep doing what you're doing, you'll eventually get it, where you have these millennials like having this rapid growth and there's a little bit of culture clash happening. But I think also to the millennial point of the high maintenance-ness, they also thrive when you give them specific things. So deadlines and goals and things like that. So they might want to know, if I'm not at this level, why? The reason they keep asking you is they actually want to know what that is. So go give them a list. It can be a stretch list. Go give them a list of the 10 things, 3 things, and then watch how they just go run and they go do it. Because that's also what they're hearing from their parents. Like, they have that two-way open communication. They do require a little more attaboy, attagirl, because they want to get that feedback, but at the same time that also is that is what they're looking for, but that's also what they're used to. They also like to have a voice and a seat at the table, because you look at statistics and, you know, the generational trends, and they got to help pick the family vacation. A lot of times because they had the best technical experience, they were the one researching the best deals on the internet for their family. So you think of, like, if they get to help influence those decisions, they think they deserve a seat at the table because they've always had a seat at the table. So if you don't necessarily want to invite them to your boardroom type of discussion, give them an opportunity to provide the input in a different forum. So the retention stuff, I mean, you laugh, but like, these are like, you guys are all laughing because you felt it, right? So you have to look for what is good out of the millennials and then try to match that in terms of how you're attracting or retaining those individuals. Because again, the reality is, for us, they're 40% of our global workforce now. They're no longer an emerging part of the workforce. They're real. They're in management, and they continue to grow. So
we're at 50% by 2020 will be millennial workforce. So
I think also millennials are less willing to do overtime. So just right, wrong, or otherwise, they're less willing to do overtime. So something food for thought.
We don't want you to run over either. So you can get back to your jobs and get out on time. But thank you to our panelists. Just a fascinating discussion.
I mentioned earlier today that proceeds from today's event would go toward Hired, and Executive Director Jane Samardzija is here today. I think she had a little bit of a traffic snarl earlier, which I think here in talking with folks around the room, that was a common issue. So Jane, if you want to come up and tell us a little bit about Hired and where this money will be put to good use, and then we'll close out today.
Yeah. So, a couple of quick minutes. Thanks, Jane.
Well, this all sounds very familiar. Hired has been for almost 50 years helping people to go to work. And many of the people that we have helped to go to work have been successive waves of immigrants since after the Vietnam War. So every wave of immigrant that we've seen coming here, we have worked with and we are still working with. In our last fiscal year, we helped more than 8,000 people. And those were people that came to us because they want to work, whether they speak English or whether they're some of that 55% in North Minneapolis or wherever. They came to us because they do want to work. They want to support themselves and they want to support their families. We help people figure out what these high demand jobs are and where they fit. Obviously, not everyone fits at Medtronic or many other companies, although some of our top employers are Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, United Health Group. Many people are hired in small companies. We've had many small business owners say, I remember when I was struggling and I wanted someone to give me a start. So those of you who are small business owners, I really encourage you to think about that. And I want to tell you also that at Hired, we help people train for the high-demand industries that Tim mentioned earlier. Healthcare, office occupations, hospitality, manufacturing. We have a wonderful program at White Bear Lake High School where we have a counselor, and we try to pipeline the kids into manufacturing. We've been working with manufacturers since 2005. That partnership to bring low-income and disadvantaged people, including women and people of color, into manufacturing has helped thousands of people get into manufacturing, including women. We're so proud of the fact that we have many women in supervisory positions in manufacturing companies now. That program was also replicated in South Africa and runs in several cities there because they needed a program to work with people who were beginning. And finally, I do want to tell you that last year, in working with those 8,000 people who come to us at various times and stay with us for various lengths of time, more than 3,300 people went to work last year, in our last fiscal year. That's what we're here for. We are here to get people out to your companies to go to work. So please feel free to call on us. We'd like to work with you. The reason we're so successful is we work very closely with employers from all kinds of companies who are on members of our employer advisory board. They advise on curriculum, they advise on what they need specifically, because that is an issue. Whether it's a very large company or a small company, what are you looking for, and how can we at Hired help you get precisely that? How can we help train people? And some of that training is the soft skills, of course. How do people act on the job? How do they deal with conflict and chaos or whatever? Anyway, we work with that too. So I want to thank Neuger Communications for having this discussion this morning. It's so important. And I think what came through and through to me listening too is, you know, this takes an investment from everyone in the community, including business. Funding for employment and training programs for people who are just starting out has, in real terms, in the last 15 years, shrunk 30%. That's government funding for those programs. So think about that. If government is shrinking their attention on employment programs and preparing our national workforce, somehow business has to impact that situation, either through getting to government or putting the money in yourselves, because you get the products, you get the workers. So we are happy to help you, and thank you very much to Neuger Communications for benefiting Hired with this program this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Excellent. Well, I think that closes everything for today. Really exciting to hear the conversation at the tail end about millennials and Gen Xers and baby boomers. That our next Common Good event, held in the new year, February 23rd, 2017, will be Connecting Our Generations, where we will explore strategies that promote productivity among all 5 working generations. So online registration is now available.